Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us in this panel about cybercrime. Our speaker today will be Professor Calvin Nobles from the Illinois Institute of Technology and the Belfort Center at Harvard University. We have a second speaker who unfortunately had an emergency coming up, Professor Daryl Burrell from the Florida Institute of Technology. He may or may not join during the course of this presentation. Hopefully he will, but he may not. So without further delay, I'll pass the floor to Professor Nobles, who will be speaking about cybercrime, connecting with something that our plenary speaker said earlier in the morning when asked about cybercrime. And he mentioned, well, one of the most important issues is that we forget the human factor. So this should be a really interesting presentation, and I pass the floor now to Professor Nobles.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you all for attending. As you can see from this presentation, we're going to talk about cybercriminals knowing our employees better than we do, and how we are currently losing the human factors battle in cybersecurity. So for as an agenda, here's some things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what is human factors, targeting of humans, the cost of global cybercrime, human performance issues, cognitive security. We're going to talk about human behavior. We're going to discuss some mitigation strategies and the business value of human factors. So I love to start off all of my presentations with a quote. And here's one of my favorite quotes. And I just read it out aloud to save us some time here. Companies spend millions of dollars on firewalls, encryption, and secure access devices, and it's money wasted because none of these measures address the weakest link in security and the security chain, people. And that was said by a well-known individual in the cybercrime area, and that is Kevin Mitnick. And I love showing slides like this, because it really gets after the point that we're trying to make throughout this presentation, and that is the human element. We have data security, and then in this corner, we have firewalls, encryptions, antivirus software, and then we also have Dave, the human error. And so companies spend, like Kevin said in the quote, a lot of money trying to solidify their cybersecurity and their cyber defenses to protect their organizations. But one thing that's repeatedly overlooked consistently is the human element. And there's tons of reasons why we want to address the human element. But one of the major reasons we really want to address the human element is because of human error. We know that about 80 to 90% of all data breaches results back to human error. And you'll hear me say this one other time, I'm just going to say it now. In today's cybersecurity realm, it's impossible to disconnect the human or remove the human from it at all, because everything we do in cybersecurity is based on the human, whether it's the engineering of algorithms, whether it's the engineering of systems, the design of security controls, the security strategy, whatever it may be, there's a human element tied to it. Even with artificial intelligence, there's a human that's designing that algorithm for that artificial intelligence to design to do what it needs to do. So we haven't reached a point where we can remove the human element from cybersecurity. And to be honest, I don't know if we ever will reach a point, but it's certainly worth discussions in the future. And so when we talk about what is human factors, the first thing we need to understand is that there is a scientific definition of what human factors is. In fact, human factors has been around in the United States for about 80 years. It was born out of military aviation, and it continued to progress over the years and over the decades into a really solid, engineering discipline that is largely overlooked by many, many entities in the federal space, in the private space, and it's just a major gap that we just seem to struggle overcoming. And the other thing is there's a working definition of human factors. We all most of the time use the working definition. We're very accustomed using the working definition of human factors, and it essentially is anything regarding the human element in security and data privacy and information technology, you name it, it's the working definition of human factors. If it's a human weakness, a human limitation, somebody make a bad decision, someone violate a policy, or someone's not compliant. We always say it's the human factors. But we're gonna now discuss the scientific definition of human factors. And what it is, human factors is a scientific approach to improve system designs to optimize human behavior and performance when engaging with information security systems, technologies, policies, procedures, and automation. Notice in there is nothing about, the weaknesses of anything of a human or human error. So when we talk about human factors, we mostly talk about it in the terms of the working definition, not the scientific definition. And for those of us who are human factors engineers, we notice right away the gap. And we also notice what we call the illegitimate use of the working definition of human factors. We really would like for companies and organizations to start transitioning to using the scientific definitions until we can get human factors integrated into cybersecurity. And so why does it really matter? Why do we really need human factors in cybersecurity? Again, we've thinking along the lines that human factors is a scientific discipline, but we also need to understand that people are the Achilles heel of cybersecurity. We are the largest vulnerability in cybersecurity. Humans are the most pursued attack vector in cybersecurity. And so that's why this is so important. And then we also get upset when people like me say that people are the weakest link in cybersecurity. We don't see doctors getting upset when they say doctors cause medical errors, or we don't see pilots getting upset when they say the extent of the accident was due to pilot error. Now, these professionals they're not waking up and saying, I'm gonna cause a pilot error today. It just happened into a chain of events that happened. So in cybersecurity, we have to get accustomed to really understanding from a system, what we call a socio-technical system approach, what are our weaknesses? It could be a material weakness, it could be a resource weakness, it could be a human weakness. And so we have to get accustomed to thinking about the overall holistic system that we're working in, and understand that in some cases, in most cases, there are going to be some human weaknesses. And we just have to come to grips with that. But at the end of the day, we reach a point now, and this is exactly what we're dealing with right now. Who needs human factors? Having this conversation with senior executives, with business decision makers, they have no idea what human factors is, especially the scientific definition. And again, remember, human factors have been around for 80 years. It's a scientific discipline that's been used in aviation. It's been used in patient care. And on the medical side of things, it's been used in nuclear power. It's been used in industrial safety. And these industries have done an amazing job of integrating human factors to reduce risk. And it's quite embarrassing for me as a human factors engineer to say, why haven't we done the same thing in human factors? It's because of this attitude right here on this slide. Who needs human factors? Because if you think about it, most of our senior executives are not looking for human factors engineer, they're looking for more software engineers. But the significance of the human element in cybersecurity begs a different question on who needs cybersecurity. Because we have to understand people are the first and last line of defense in information security. People argue with me about this one ad nauseum, and I tell them all the time. Everything, like I said earlier, you can't remove the human element. We haven't reached that point yet. Now we have technologies, and we have vendor-based products. We have a lot of automation, but at the end of the day, that is still driven by the human element. We have very complex ecosystems, and what I mean by that, our ecosystems, our cybersecurity ecosystem, our network infrastructures are so complicated today that they easily exceed the cognitive abilities of most of our employees, including those working in the security space and those working in the technology space. And most of the sophisticated attacks we see today, our cognitive attacks, are aimed at people, and they are so real, they make sense. And we're going to talk about why they're so real and why they make sense and why so many of our employees fall victim to cognitive attacks. And we just lack practical solutions for cognitive attacks right now. Another thing we're beginning to see, we've been seeing this for several years now, almost at a decade or so, based on the research, is that the asymmetric threat targeting humans is really sustained. 80 to 90% of all cybersecurity incidents are due to human error. Every 39 seconds, there's a successful cyber attack. And on a daily basis, there are 230,000 variants of malware created daily targeting people. And so you see this asymmetric threat towards our employees because they remain the largest vulnerability within the cybersecurity ecosystem. And we can no longer continue to put our head in the ground and ignore this problem because it's wasteful that so many of our issues are caused by human-related risk. And so we must find a way to mitigate those risks. And so continuing to ignore the problem leads back to the earlier slide that said, who needs human factors? And so when we talk about the human error and what it eventually leads to, it leads to global cybercrime. A lot of this crime is based off human error. And when we look at the cost of global cybercrime, and we look at it in the terms of GDP, it gets real interesting very quickly because you can see, based on the GDPs here, the cost of global cybercrime, $6 trillion, is third only behind the United States and China when it comes to the GDP. So it's a sustained business for cybercriminals and some hackers. And unfortunately, I'm not giving credence to it. I'm just saying it's an issue. And when you start putting it together and you start looking at it foundationally, you ask the question, wow, why is this so sustained? And one of the reasons why it's sustained is because the human element remains one of the most ignored problems in cybersecurity. And if you want to break the cost of global cybercrime down even further, you can take a look here and see what it costs us a year. You can even break it down to a second. And so I use this slide to help drive attention towards global cybercrime and the connection to human error. And so now we get into the cognitive security piece of this thing. And so why target humans? Because humans make mistakes. They make errors, and they create the open window for attacks. Why? Because humans have physical and cognitive limitations, and organizations do not use an error taxonomy in cybersecurity. And what does that mean? That means that based on when we have errors, we have things that happen in cybersecurity. We look at things from a digital forensics aspect, but do we look at it from a human error aspect where we're using an error taxonomy to really find the contributing factors of what happened? For an example, when I give you an example, when the Equifax CEO went to Congress and he testified in front of Congress, he blamed the patching on an information technologist. Well, the fact that the information technologist did not patch the system is just one of what we call the latent failures. But let's put it in perspective. The information technology didn't patch the system. However, what happened to the auditing and the oversight from the management oversight to allow the IT, the information technologists, to patch the system? What happened to the governance? Governance is an executive level function. So what happened to the governance that would have drove the internal auditing that would have prompted management to take action on the lack of patching? So blaming it on the information technologies is the easy way out. In fact, to be honest with you, part of it was the information technologists, but the major contributing factor was the fact that the executive was not running a governance program that was effective. That enabled the information technologists to not do the patching. And that's what an error taxonomy can bring to the table for you. It will break things down in layers, and you can highlight along the layers. And one of the best error taxonomy that I recommend is called the Human Factors and Analysis Classification System. It's used predominantly in aviation, but it has direct applicability to cybersecurity because we have layers in our organization just as well as the layers in aviation. And so having an error taxonomy can help us help us discover the contributing factors to why errors and mistakes happen in cybersecurity. And then we also have to talk about human limitations, because we all have biases. And based on our biases and our prejudices, we also have heuristics. And this is where we try to make decisions and we try to perceive things based on abstract meaning, especially when all the information or all the data is not there. And because we have a personal disposition, that also helps limit us from seeing the complete and the holistic picture of things sometimes. And so that also enables cyber criminals to use the visceral influence and these factors on us. It's where they are pressing us upon us to do something illegal, something out of compliance. And because when people get pressed with this type of thing during a cognitive attack, everything that they know in terms of their training goes out of the window, because the visceral influence is so strong. It's like a strong urge. It's like when you're hungry and you're trying to find food, or when you're thirsty and you're trying to find water, or if it's that type of, when you're in pain and you're trying to find medicine, it's that type of influence that you have on the perception and decision-making process of an employee when it happens. But we don't talk about these things in cybersecurity because we don't really explore the human element deep enough. And so when we talk about the human performance issues in cybersecurity, there are four major performance issues that we really need to talk about in cybersecurity regarding the human element. Stress is one of them. You think about organizations that are undermanned when it comes to having enough cybersecurity professionals. You think about all the change. You think about, a lot of the different requirements and a lot of the activities put up on the cybersecurity professionals, because simply cyber criminals and hackers have a vote. And because the cyber threat environment is so dynamic, it drives a lot of change. It drives a lot of adaptation and modification of things. And this in turn creates stress on employees, because there's a constant change, there's a constant adaptation. Most of our cybersecurity professionals don't have to reach a point where things are normalized. There's a constant change, especially in some of our more attacked industries. And this change drives about stress. The other one is distractions. We all are just, we all went through COVID. We're still going through COVID to some extent. And that drove about a lot of change, because now we're cybersecurity professionals and even some of your technology teams are working together in a centralized location. Now they're working disaggregated from home. And at home, some of the families, have mom and dad working from home. They have grandparents at home. They have school-age kids at home. They have pets at home. And then you got cybersecurity professionals trying to do everything. They're a teacher now. They're the dining facility team at school. And they're doing it at home now. They're the coach now. They took on a lot of responsibility, and these things distracted them. And there was nothing we really could do, because most organizations was extremely underprepared for COVID. The other thing that comes about is fatigue. Fatigue is real, and a lot of people don't want to call it out, but it's real. When you ask most senior executives how do they deal with fatigue, most of them will tell you, well, I try to understand what my people are dealing with. That's not good enough. Some organizations have gotten better since COVID. They give their teams mental health days. That is a wonderful strategy and mitigating fatigue, but is it enough? I would tell you as a human factors engineer, it's not enough. But fatigue is real. And what is fatigue? Fatigue is where you just essentially check out. You mentally, cognitively check out, because you just don't have the stamina to do it. And so you're not able to process and cycle things that are going on. Now imagine if you had a lead engineer who was working a merger doing a merger and acquisition of two financial institutions. That is a major evolution inside of itself. And imagine if that lead engineer and what he was going through a divorce, another life-changing event, right? At the same time on top of COVID, right? And so we never think about how these things impact our cybersecurity professionals. They do, just like they impact our doctors, just like they impact pilots. For instance, if a pilot is at a point to where he's not cognitively in the game, there's things the organization have in place for him or her where they can find them something to do until they're able to overcome that life-changing event that's causing them that fatigue. Same thing with a doctor. If a doctor's fatigued or he or she is unable to perform their work, they're able to call timeout. They're able to say, we're not going to perform the procedures. They're able to pass those procedures or those surgeries over to another surgeon. We don't think about these things in cybersecurity. We keep our foot on the accelerator. And because we keep our foot on the accelerator, we are increasing the risk. We need a new approach to addressing these human factors issues in cybersecurity. And the last one is burnout. And burnout starts at the top. In fact, most chief information security officers, their tenure is 18 to 24 months. And there's a lot of burnout in that. And the question asked is, why is there so much burnout? If this burnout is not managed at the top, it cascades down through the different levels of the organization. And so we see that. The research tells us that. And we continue to try to mitigate burnout with, some time off. Some people are so beyond the point of burnt out that research tells us it might take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks for them just to recover from being burnt out. And we're not even talking about, that means 4 to 6 weeks of not working, not doing anything, kind of like on a mental vacation. And so we have to get to the left of burnout so we can put some programs, some initiatives in place to prevent it from happening. And so these 4 human performance issues are just 4 of many. And so we really need to start talking about human performance issues in cybersecurity, because when these 4 elements set in on an employee or employees, they're unable to do their job to the fullest extent. And it leads to increased risk because they're more vulnerable now. And throughout my research, I was able to come up with different types of fatigue in cybersecurity. Here's a list. And I stopped because some of the, the list could have been easily been 15, but I combined some of them because they were very similar. But you can see, I show this slide just to highlight all the different types of fatigue. And these are the different types of fatigue that managers are not familiar with. They're not talking about. And they should be. We need to do a better job of talking about human performance. And then we talk about the threat environment. You talk about all the various things that our organizations are facing. Now, we have to agree on something here, that most of our organizations are fighting back. They're doing everything within their power to protect their organization. But cybercriminals have an advantage on us. They have a huge strategic advantage on us, is that they can maneuver and disseminate malicious payloads quicker than we can identify and engineer a solution for. That is a huge strategic advantage to have. And so you think about cybercrime as a service now, where you have entities working together. They formalize the business to wreak havoc, not only on individuals, but organizations and governments. And so this is another thing to think about when you're talking about the human element. Now you're thinking about, we just talked about human performance issues. And now we're talking about criminal organizations doing things like this, formalizing cybercrime as a service. It places more stress on the organization. That stress cascades down to the individuals responsible for protecting the organization. And why do they do it? Because they can get away, they can remain anonymous. It's very difficult in some cases to track these people down. And so now we have humans as an attack vector, because cybercriminals are going to continue to prey on our employee weaknesses. They know what they are, because organizations lack effective mitigation strategies for cognitive attacks. When you start talking about cognitive security, most organizations don't even have a plan. They don't even know what it is. They don't even think about behavioral science in cybersecurity. What we think about in cybersecurity is engineering and technology, mostly engineering. And if everybody's thinking like an engineer, the only solution we're going to come up with is an engineering solution. That engineering solution is not going to get you what you need for cognitive security and behavior science. So some of you are asking, what is cognitive hacking? It's the act of deceiving end users to provide information or execute an act that violates security policies, which also successfully enables the execution of the attack. In other words, it's a cyber criminal or a hacker trying to deceive you to do something that you would normally wouldn't do. For instance, we see this in the terms of emails with malicious attachments. We see it in terms of text messages. We see it in the terms of people calling us, asking us for sensitive information. Why? Because when I say they, the cyber criminals know that the end users have biases. They know that they are basing things on their experiences, and they know that they're cognitive limited. So cognitive hacking is a cyber attack that manipulates our perception, our psychological abilities, and they explore our vulnerabilities. Again, this conversation is not had enough within organization cybersecurity programs. When we talk about cognitive hacking, we have two types, the overt type and the covert type. As you can see, the overt type here is going to be, spooking emails, a spooking email address. That's spoofing email addresses, changing bank account information on a transaction. That's just two types of overt cognitive hacking. And then we have covert, which is the phishing, smishing, and vishing that I talked about. And so when we talk about cognitive hack techniques, why are they successful? Why do they work? Because employees are undertrained on cognitive hacking. At the end of the day, we say phishing. Organizations are running phishing simulations. So you either do the phishing simulations, you either get phished or you don't. That's not enough. Here's something to think about. What happened if we did a phishing simulation and the goal was for everybody to be successfully phished? Not because you have a weakness, but for training purposes. For instance, they tell you to open an email and click on a link. But in the training, they show you how a phishing email leads to the damaging process that it leads to, into data exploitation and what that means for the company. If they show you the process of why we try to prevent people from clicking on emails, give you more in-depth training to let you understand what we're really trying to prevent. Because at the end of the day, you got to remember, these phishing emails are not just targeting your cybersecurity professionals. They're targeting some of the most sensitive people in your organization, your executive leadership, some of the people in HR, some of the people in logistics, some of the people that's on your physical security detail, people who don't get up close and personal with cybersecurity every day. And so why would you target those folks? Because they're probably the most least aware, or they're probably the most least expecting. And so employees play a vital role in these cognitive attacks. Our goal is to prevent these cognitive attacks from happening. But one of the things that we're up against is that cybercriminals have such strong tradecraft in this. They have all day to sit and devise a plan to come up to attack you. They learn as much as they can about potential targets. They look at your social media, they look for you, they look for photographs, they look at the internet. Sometimes they try to spoof you. They do whatever they can to gain insight into who you really are so that they can really have a successful phishing campaign. And that's where the spear phishing, the vishing, and the smishing comes in. We see these things on a daily basis. And from there, they try to understand your patterns and your trends and who you are. And then they want to build relationships with you, establish that trust. And when they establish that trust, that's when they pull the trigger and get you in even closer, to get you to do something that you normally wouldn't do. And here's just a very simple process of the cycle of phishing attacks. You see it comes in the form of an email as an attachment. It's targeting specific users, systems in danger. Once you click on that malicious email, and then that remote access tool is installed, and then they further explore the internal network until they traverse their way to your data. And then that data is exfiltrated back to the attacker. In most cases, it doesn't stop there. Most people who's been successfully attacked will be attacked again, because they realize the attacker realizes that you have a weakness, and they're going to continue to exploit that. Some of the other things to think about is the human behavior in cognitive hacks. Been very impulsive. Open emails, clicking on things instead of taking time and reading it and check to see where it comes from. They capitalize on your impulsivity. They capitalize on the lack of your self-control. You have to have self-control when you do these things. And sometimes they know when you don't have self-control. Can you imagine someone putting time pressure, giving them a time and putting that pressure on them to execute something that's illegal? You're losing self-control. And because you're losing that self-control, you help them out. You actually execute the attack for them by being an active participant. Compliance. They look for people who are less likely to be compliant. The research tells us under certain situations, we all are likely to not to be compliant. Whether you're female, male, regardless of your demographic, there's a situation where we all at some point are not going to be compliant. As hard as we try, most employees just want to come to work and do their jobs. That's all they want to do. But sometimes we have implemented such complex systems that they can't. Our complexity debt is too high. And then other people have a weakness of just being obedience to authority. If you come across like a figurehead, somebody important, you can easily fool people into providing you something or giving you something that they normally shouldn't, or that they might lose their wits about. Flattery is another one. We see this with a lot of the letters from the hacks coming in from Nigeria, where they've been very flattery to women and they're trying to exploit them for monetary reasons. Sometimes we see it in the form of intimidation. Trust, sometimes they get close to us and then they ask us to do something. And we do it because we see that person as a friend. When they don't really see us as a friend, they see us as an opportunity to exploit us. Some of us are just gullible. And then some have low self-esteem and they get exploited on that because they're trying to do something to help somebody because they have low self-esteem and they're trying to be liked. And so these are some of the just human behavior that, that cyber criminals are able to exploit in a cognitive attack. And one of the reasons why these cognitive hacks are so successful is because we don't have psychology professionals integrated into cybersecurity. Again, we think mostly in terms of technology and engineering when it comes to cybersecurity. But a psychologist and the people that work in the psychology field can bring about major changes to your cybersecurity program from the perspective of a human element. They can improve your human-computer interaction. When you're designing things, whether it's a system, an application, or a service, they can really help you design it for not only for the right populace, but also from a security perspective, where you're designing things to take out so much of the unquestionable things that lead to risk. They can enhance your human-centered cybersecurity, put more focus on the human element, build around the human rather than building around technology. That's what we're doing right now. We build around technology and we expect the people to keep up with the technology. Understand and mitigate the negative influences on performance. Like, why are your people stressed out? Why is burnout so high? Why are they so distracted? How do we eliminate those adverse things so that people can focus and they will be they can have the cognitive abilities to do their job. Identify critical operation tasks and functions. Like for instance, in aviation, pilots would tell you they have two critical phases of flight: takeoff and landing. And sometimes they'll say a third one if there's an emergency situation, or there's inclement weather sometimes that's really bad. What are the critical operation tasks and functions in cybersecurity? What are they? What controls did you put around them? What human controls did you put around them? It's just something else to think about, why we should integrate psychologists into our cybersecurity operations. We're at a point now where we really need to partner with psychology professionals. These are your human factors practitioners, your psychologists, your behavior scientists, your cognitive scientists, and user experience researchers and designers. There's a lot of movement with user experience researchers and designers. And that is a great move. Unfortunately, a lot of these teams, the teams of user experience researchers and designers, are looking externally at customer service, customer interaction. How do we take the same focus and bend it back internally, reciprocating internally, where we're looking at our cybersecurity programs, we're looking at our policies, we're looking at our procedures, we're looking at how we integrate technologies into our operations so that we can reduce some of the high friction points, whether it's fatigue, burnout, or just people not trusting, the technologies that they're working with. This is what your user experience researchers and designers can do for you if we put them on a vector where they're looking internally rather externally. The other thing that causes us to be so vulnerable is social influence and social proof. And we see this a lot on social media, where somebody will support a particular subject, or they will say, hey, I work with this, I work with this company, they did great and for me in the past. And now everybody feels that you in your circle of influence, like, hey, that company is it's an entrusted company. Same things happen with cognitive hacks. Somebody get an email and say, hey, I got this funny picture today. It's really funny to me. And they pass it around to their friends. And unbeknownst to all of them, there's an application-less executable file being downloaded in the background, unbeknownst to them, and it's malicious. And now the hacker's able to see all of their keystrokes. Just something to think about, where you're getting emails, and where do you limit your social proof and your social influence on your behavior in the digital space? It's really, really difficult to do sometimes. And again, we talked about the visual influence. It's something that when it hits you, it's a strong urge to do something. And this is another vector that cybercriminals take advantage of employees with. And they're typically going to apply some time pressure with that. So it makes it even harder to get out. And so this is how a lot of people fall victim to cyber attacks. What makes our employees vulnerable though? There's some large things, some really gaping holes in cybersecurity. And the other one is there's an underappreciation for human factors in cybersecurity. I conducted a study, actually conducted my dissertation on this. And one of the things that I realized was that one, senior executives didn't really understand human factors from a scientific perspective. And two, there's an underappreciation of it because there's a knowledge gap. There's a lack of human factors initiatives in cybersecurity. How many of you ever noticed when you walk into a hospital, an emergency room, or into your doctor's office, that doctor office, most of the doctor offices are laid out in a similar format? That's done by design. That's purposely done, intentionally done. Same thing when you go to a surgical suite or you in an emergency room, everything in there is by design. And the reason it's by design is because they're trying to reduce errors that happen in the medical side of the field. And so I think there's a lot for us to learn in the cybersecurity field by what's happening in the other domains and how they're implementing human factors. Our cybersecurity awareness is ineffective. It leaves employees undertrained and vulnerable. Because if you're doing computer-based training, that's not enough. And if you're doing it once a year, that's not enough. our employees need to have reinforced cybersecurity awareness. The threat environment is constantly changing. It's very adaptive. And so your cybersecurity awareness has to be adaptive and continuous. Again, something we see in aviation. Even though a pilot might have 20,000 or 30,000 hours if they're a senior captain, they still have to go to the simulator to get their in-depth training. Do they go through all their emergency procedures? And if I'm not mistaken, they do this, I want to say at least once a year. Even though they fly the plane flawlessly, they are still required to come back for more in-depth training. The other problem we see is poor system design and integration. We integrate capabilities on top of other technical capabilities, and we continue to build. And it get to a point to where it's extremely complex. And now we're at the point now that we don't even know how to mitigate the system designs to reduce human errors. And that leads to complexity debt, where things are just so complicated, people are just constantly trying to figure it out. And malicious actors understand human limitations better than anybody else, better than our employees. They know the limitations. Remember, some of these malicious actors and some of these cyber criminals are cybersecurity professionals by day and cyber criminals by night. And so let's talk about some of the human factors initiatives. And so in some organizations, especially like in aviation and in medicine and nuclear power and nuclear energy, and even in space exploration, they have human factors programs. And these programs are built solely just so researchers can understand the physical and the behavior and cognitive and social influence of cybersecurity and technology professionals. We really need to understand that. Right now, we don't understand it enough. It's because human factors practitioners are not integrated into cybersecurity. And we need to be. And that's why a human factors program can help you eliminate some of those high friction elements regarding the human element. Your human factors platform, your human factors program, that is, should be executive led to give it some teeth. It should be targeting purposely cybersecurity, and it needs to make human factors a mainstream topic. And it needs to work around the discovering and implementing practical solutions based on human-based risks. And the goals, just establish some goals for your human factors program. Your goals can be whatever it needs to be for your program, because every organization is different. Most industries have different objectives. And so design some human factors goals, whatever they may be. But at the end of the day, the purpose of having your human factors goal should really culminate into reducing organizational risk. And here's some human factors initiatives. Recognize the knowledge gap with human factors. Establish a human factors platform. Conduct a human factors assessment. Most organizations conduct a risk assessment, but they don't conduct a human factors risk assessment. Partner with human factors specialists. Implement internal focused UX design practices. And conduct surveys to determine stress, fatigue, and burnout. And here's the business value. At the end of the day, the business value of human factors in cybersecurity is you will have a better cognitively focused workforce where they have practices in place, to reduce those high friction areas, whether it's stress, whether it's technical debt, whether it's complexity debt, poor system design, or just mental inabilities to do their job. And so it leads to a healthier workforce. And that is critical for organizations. Most people don't really understand the business value that human factors bring to the table. But the human factors is just not about a scientific field that just exists for people to do it just because. There are some return on investment, some really solid returns on investment. And there's an under-education on human factors. We have to get rid of this. We have to talk about human factors more. We have to be willing to roll up our sleeves, and we have to listen. Every time I engage a group of experts or a group of cybersecurity experts, that is, on human factors, the first thing I notice is how much they want to tell me they know about human factors. And to be honest with you, 99% of the time, they're talking about the work-based definition of human factors. And when I approach it from a scientific definition, the room goes instantly quiet. And it's my job to help educate them so we don't have what's on this slide here. Hey, I'm here to help, and the executives closing you out because they don't see the value in it. And with that, I'd like to conclude and turn it over for questions and answers, hopefully.
Thank you, Calvin. That was very interesting. And then again, connecting to a comment that our plenary speaker, Professor Boer, said earlier about cybersecurity, the question that someone made to him was, well, how do we prevent this? And the first thing he said was human factors. We forget about human factors, but that is extremely essential in cybersecurity. So one of the questions that we have, which is related to all of this and something that you've been saying throughout your presentation, the lack of education, the gap in knowledge, and all those things. But I guess the question here is why is it so hard for executives or organizations to accept human factors, or the concept of human factors, as an essential component of cybersecurity? This is a question by Jacob Smith. He says, I would have thought that it should be a lot more obvious that human factors are an essential component of cybersecurity, but why isn't it more obvious?
And thank you. And that's a great question, Jacob. And I would tell you why. It's because human factors, cybersecurity is still evolving, and we see it every day. It continues to evolve. And when you don't have a representative of a particular domain like human factors, you don't have an appreciation for it. I remember talking with a CISO, and I was trying to explain to him what a human factors engineer bring to the table. And he was asking me about certification. How can you help me with my certification problem? In terms of, people certifying access, right? For identity access management. And I'm like, I said, let's take a step back. We're looking at human related issues. What you're talking about is a security related issue. So we need to go back and we need to talk about why the human element is so important. It's a discussion that most senior executives don't want to have because it's a knowledge gap. I gave a presentation in 2019 down in Atlanta, and one of the CISOs in the room came up to me afterwards and she said, I had no idea that I had zero knowledge on human factors, and you just taught me a major blind spot that I have in my organization. And this person was the CISO of a healthcare company. Remind you, on the patient care side of healthcare, they've already implemented human factors. It haven't transversed over to the cybersecurity side. Again, it's because we have silos we have to break those silos, and we have to find ways to accept, ways to improve the human element in cybersecurity.
So following up on that idea, do you consider that there's a movement towards more multidisciplinarity, so to speak, in cybersecurity fields in order to be open to these other issues or types of knowledge? Do you think that it's going that way? Do you think it's stagnant? How do you see it going forward?
So going forward, multidisciplinary is definitely a way to go. And I could tell you, I just recently had a good news story where I was actually hired by a bank to be their human factors engineer. So when they have human factors related issues, they'll be reaching out to me, and we'll be partnering and working together to mitigate and solve some of those issues. So that's a huge win for that particular bank. And the thing about it is, the more we have discussions like this, it helps get the word out. The other thing is, it's going to take people in senior level positions realizing that if you have a knowledge gap, to seek expertise on it. Don't try to fill it in, because what you see a lot, you see organizations try to fix human-related problems with organic talent that they have. If you don't have a psychologist or human factors engineer or a cognitive analyst or a behavior analyst, then chances are you will never fix these problems. It's equivalent to a bus mechanic trying to repair an airplane engine. It's just not that simple. And so we have to really open our minds and change the optics of where my problems are and who's going to be able to solve those problems for me.
Thank you. We have a question here from Richard. I'm not sure, Calvin, if this question will make sense to you. If not, we can ask Richard to clarify. He says, I know a number of individuals that counter hack. When can we see the federal government plans to shut down this cottage industry of hackers abroad?
That's a great question. And I would tell you that there is an effort to shut some of these people down, but we also have to remember who some of these cyber criminals and some of these hackers are. If they're state sponsored, right, then you're not going to shut them down. They have the backing of their senior executive administration, and there's no way you're going to shut them down. It's just a part of their national responsibility, just like we have, U.S. Cyber Command and our cyber elements around the U.S. doing what we do. They feel the same way. It's just that in other countries, they don't have the laws and the legislation that we have in place. We have a great check and balance in place in this country to make sure that people don't get out of hand with, cyber attacks and being a cyber criminal and hacking people when they shouldn't. Other countries don't have those same types of legislation. So it's like a wild, wild west out there to them. And so, in fact, you have nation states that hire and work with cyber criminals because they're looking to, potentially attack another country. And so we see it play out all the time. And so I just don't foresee it going away anytime soon. I believe, what we're going to have to do is double down on our security and especially as individuals, and then as an organization, and then, as a country, we're going to have to double down on our security infrastructure to make sure those entities stays free from any potential attack, because I mean, the Colonial Pipeline taught us a lot, didn't it?
Yes, and and when talking about critical infrastructure, that's a whole other series of issues that we don't really seem to be focusing on or have an answer for until we find that the critical infrastructure is actually pretty vulnerable to attacks of all sorts. And following up from that, you mentioned, yes, some countries, some states are sponsors of cyber criminality and cyber terrorism. And everyone remembers when the Sony Corporation was hacked because they released a movie that was offensive to North Korea, and very immediately then Sony was hacked. Now, being this a case where it's a state actor attacking a private company in U.S. territory, what role do you think the federal government should play, if any at all, in promoting cybersecurity, both for the private and the public enterprise? Given the huge sums of dollars that are lost per every one of these attacks.
Absolutely. The federal government plays a huge role, and not only from just, from a defense side of the house with our Department of Defense, and then with our U.S. Cyber Command and with our intelligence communities, but there's a partnership at the very top where corporations and the heads of federal agencies and the federal government and the intelligence community, they work together, and that's great. And they all have some access to each other, and I like that, because that's the only way we're going to get better at doing this. Because at some point, when it comes to national security, you have to look beyond the profitability that these companies are trying to pursue and think about it long term, the long term effect that it could have on the country by us not sharing information and working together. So that private public partnership is key to the United States achieving our national security objectives. Because if one entity is seeing something, a certain type of cyber attack, that information should be shared immediately with the federal government and other entities so that everybody doesn't have to face the attack.
Thank you. We have one more question from Troy Smith. How do you approach assessing the human approach from cybersecurity implementation and uptake rather than victimization?
So if I understand correctly, and let me know if I answer this correctly for you. So what I recommend that all organizations, the first thing they do, just like every year, organizations conduct a risk assessment. They should also conduct a human factors risk assessment. Where are your sticking points for your human elements? Are they properly trained? Are you under-resourced? Do you have a lot of technical debt, complexity debt? How are you dealing with that? Are you having people who are just overwhelmed with the amount of changes? Do your policies make sense? Are you vetting your policies across the organization so that you can make sure that with the compliance of this policy is not going to impact a particular organization? And so by doing a human factors risk assessment, you really start to highlight some of the different issues around humans in the organization. And for instance, I know the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they actually conduct human factors risk assessments. And through those assessments, they're able to really determine a lot of initiatives, such as being checklist oriented. A lot of organizations are not checklist oriented. They try to do all of their procedures and practices from memory. That is not the way you want to do something, because when that visceral influence come up on you, you're not going to remember anything that you think you remember, but having a checklist in front of you, you're able to follow the steps. So I think one of the best ways that you can really get out ahead of this is to actually do a human factors risk assessment to see where your weaknesses are, and even to see where your strengths are. Let's not just talk about weaknesses, right? Because some organizations are doing some good things out there. They are checklist oriented. They have strong training programs, and they have their leadership's ear. So based on what they're doing, let's take note and let's see, can we apply that to some of the other organizations who are not doing so well?
Thank you. We don't have more questions, so we can go ahead and close this session. Thank you very much, Calvin, for being here today. We always enjoy having you in the program. So thank you for being here again this year. And thank you to our audience. We remind you that recordings will be available next week of all the sessions. Those recordings are open access, and we encourage everyone to use the videos for teaching in the classroom and whatever else. So stay in touch, and we hope to see you in the last set of panels coming in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.